On a sluggish Tuesday afternoon, I got that initial email. "Are you bored?" was the only word in the subject line. "Yep, I am," I whispered as I leaned back in my battered office chair. It was a sluggish office every day. Honestly, I was just as unconcerned as my employer. For the most part, I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. At my official job, I entered data. Actually, I worked for no more than 2 hours every day, leaving me with 6 hours to do nothing but stare at my phone, play with my screen, or otherwise pass the time. Skeptically, I opened the email and clicked the link. "Are you unhappy with your life?" it asked. "Require further framework? Here, we can lend a hand. To enroll, go to our website right now." I couldn't help but laugh at the blatant con, but boredom can be a powerful motivation, and a virus may have provided me with something intriguing to handle. I followed the instructions and clicked the link after activating my antivirus protection and VPN. A page with large black characters at the top appeared on a white background. Follow these 8.5 guidelines to stay alive in the face of paranormal and other weird events. A straightforward inquiry, "Do you accept?" appeared beneath it, with alternatives for yes or no. While smiling, I paused for a moment. If I had to guess, I'd say a rock was more religious or superstitious than I ever was. I didn't believe in ghosts, devils, or rules governing the supernatural. Nonetheless, I pressed the yes button because I had absolutely nothing else to do. On the screen, a big "thank you" appeared. While I logged out and stretched, I shook my head and laughed softly. "Just the right moment for coffee," I said to myself. I entered our break area, where, as always, the musty aroma of burnt coffee and crackers greeted me. Co-workers whose names I hardly knew coughed faintly and occasionally sniffled as the coffee machine hummed along. Even by building standards, the break room was the most gloomy spot in the entire facility. "My man Jamie, how are you doing today?" My shaky calm was shattered when Patrick's voice broke through. I felt an internal cringe. Talking to Patrick about nothing was like being waterboarded if you think small chat is painful. Patrick thought we were buddies, completely oblivious to the truth. Plus, our manager casually ignored his unsettling tendency to watch obscene content in his cubicle while on the clock. I was in the middle of a client call once when I heard the distinct noises of satisfaction coming from Patrick's cubicle. I wished the earth would just open up and engulf me, as the customer obviously was completely bewildered. With a series of hand gestures, Patrick proceeded to dive into an unrelated anecdote. I mentioned that sometimes. As I drift off into unconsciousness, I think that's awesome. At last, the brewing of my coffee was complete. Carelessly pouring myself a cup, I whisked in the sugar and cream. As I raised the cup to my mouth, I came to a complete stop. Observing Patrick from behind, beyond his madly flailing arms, I noticed something. Curling around the doorway of the break room was a pale, spectral hand, its trembling fingers betraying its presence. Anxietism aside, I mustered out a smile. It was obviously an attempt at bringing some humor to this otherwise dull and lifeless landscape. The hand was followed by a head, a torso, and finally legs. A woman whose degeneration made her age difficult to determine came into the room. She was probably in her mid-30s. Patches of her blotchy, pallid skin peeled off like peeling wallpaper. An disturbing aroma of decay mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "Hi, my name is Shannon," and I recognized her green apron with the crooked name tag. I waited for a colleague to laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation as I watched her approach, my smile growing even broader. Despite her going close enough to Patrick, not a single soul glanced upwards. Her hazy but intent gaze swung straight toward me as she stumbled. Coming to a sudden halt, she snatched my coffee cup from my hand and, with her skeletal fingers quivering ever so slightly, pretended to pour something invisible into it. With a hideous grin, she returned it before tripping and disappearing. Looking around, I nervously chuckled. However, nobody did anything. Anxieties made my arms prickle. As time went on, the prank became less funny. Something seemed odd. With a mix of annoyance and perplexion visible on his face, Patrick fixed his gaze on me. "Dude, can't you hear me?" "Make it happen," he spoke up. Somewhat startled, I blinked. Excuse me. My heart leaped for joy. For the last, 5 minutes, I've been attempting to get your attention. All this time, you've just stood there, looking blankly ahead. Are you kidding me? As I attempted to brush it off, I said. Patrick stood his ground. Seriously, dude, yeah. Do you feel all right? Sorry, I'm simply exhausted. Forcing another laugh, I lied. Patrick shook his head doubtfully, turned aside, and grunted. My eyes landed on the mug of coffee that Shannon had made for me. Nothing out of the ordinary in its appearance or aroma prompted me to set it aside, but a voice in my head begged me to. I took a drink nevertheless, driven by pure embarrassment and rebellion. I spit out the liquid in an instant, almost missing Patrick as he recoiled in horror. What on earth, man? He reacted angrily and began to retreat toward the exit. You're acting rather strangely today. Turning away from him, I fixated on the cup. It felt like motor oil and tasted like Dayquil, an unpleasant medicine. My stomach churned, so I threw the cup on the counter and dashed back to my cubicle, where my interested co-workers watched me with wide eyes. I regained access to my computer, my hands quivering ever so slightly. Unknown sender's fresh email appeared at the very top of my inbox. First and foremost, you should never mix your coffee counterclockwise. Read the subject line. I reworked my schedule for the following week to conform to the first rule. I slid up at first, just out of habit, and I stirred sleepily counterclockwise without giving it any thought. Shannon, the spectral barista, appeared out of the shadows with each slip, clumsily making her way into the kitchen. She would add imagined things to my coffee, making it thick, aggressive, and medicinal tasting, while muttering something unintelligible. I was frightened the first 2 or 3 times. By Thursday, I had made up my mind to flush the tainted coffee down the drain. Just how is it possible to comprehend something so out of the ordinary? At first I thought it was all in my head, or that Patrick and the others at work were pulling a cruel joke on me. Perhaps someone threw a curveball into my meal just to see how I'd react. They could pull it off, I'm sure. I had a feeling this wasn't like any other, though. I was at a loss for a rational explanation for this. I had mastered the art of stirring clockwise by Friday, notwithstanding how unsettling it had been. My phone rang that Sunday night as I sat on the couch, awaiting the arrival of yet another week of meaningless labor. Yet another message had arrived from the unknown sender. With a little racing heart, I cracked it open. Second rule, cover your feet if you plan on watching a horror film after midnight. With a mix of skepticism and amusement, I gazed at it. Stupid superstition number 2, something else that isn't harmful. I glanced at the clock, feeling a little rebellious. At 11:23 p.m., and decided to try it out without thinking. By willfully flinging the blanket off my feet as the opening credits rolled, I rejected my favorite horror film, The Thing, by John Carpenter. I failed to see that the clock had rolled beyond midnight. Up until the part where Bennings was interrupted mid-transformation, I was completely absorbed. At my feet, I felt an abrupt tingle, like if little ice fingers were caressing my flesh. My body felt as though it had been coated in invisible ice as I hurriedly sought for the blanket. I was paralyzed with fear as the feeling spread from my calves to my thighs, causing my anxiety to build up to a terrifying climax. I turned off the TV in a last-ditch effort. The screen turned black at that very second. The numbness and paralysis that had been numbing my legs vanished as quickly as it had come. I sat there, my heart pounding, aware that sleep would be tough this evening. Work the following day was challenging. I attempted to come up with a reasonable answer while sleep deprivation ate away at my sanity. I got nowhere after scouring my inbox and message boards. With nothing but my handwritten notes remaining as evidence, it was as if the first emails had never happened. Like water flowing from an open faucet, my sense of reality started to seep out of my consciousness. In spite of the fear, I couldn't deny that my life had taken on a whole new level of excitement. Finally, Friday afternoon had here, and with it came the prospect of 2 days away from tedious job and Patrick's unvarnished opinions. Another email popped up on my phone as I was getting ready to go. Third rule, don't take out the trash while the moon is full. I looked up the next full moon, which is precisely 2 weeks from today, and muttered the rule out loud as I stared at my screen. Deciding to give this one my whole attention, I wrote it down in a notebook. As time went on, I let my curiosity and boredom get the better of me, and I ended up recklessly dragging trash cans toward the apartment's trash compactor under the hypnotic glow of the full moon. Looking up at the moon's radiant disk made all my troubles seem little. A horn-blowing vehicle jolted me back to the present, breaking that serene moment. Feeling self-conscious, I awkwardly waved and threw my trash into the compactor while dramatically washing my hands. I stayed, bracing myself for the supernatural or the terrifying. After 30 minutes of nothingness, I felt the weight of disappointment. I started to head back home when I heard a scrambling and looked over to see a little rat racing toward the trash can. I cautiously trailed after, aiming my spotlight into the shadowy crevice until I caught sight of the raccoon gnawing on the garbage. As the abrupt ray of light reached it, it pivoted, hissed violently, and then vanished further into the darkness. I brushed it off and went home, feeling both disappointed and pleased that nothing worse had transpired. The relief was short-lived. The next time I went to empty the garbage, I opened the door to the compactor and saw something out of a horror movie. In an instant, my throat tightened and the bag dropped from my grasp. The mouse had matured into a canine-sized creature. Its black eyes mirrored the dim light of the street lamp as it faced me. Its gigantic fangs were drooling, and a loud, menacing hiss came roaring out of its throat. With my pulse racing from fear, I firmly closed the lid. The rat beast pounded its claws against the metal door before I could even move aside, causing a deafening boom to reverberate from within. It had sensed my presence and was ravenous. I quickly made the reservation and dashed back to my apartment, where I locked the door and collapsed on the floor, my mind filled with a million questions. Reports began to stream in over the next several days. Animals have vanished, and people in the neighborhood are talking nervously about seeing a gigantic monster in the dark. Missing person reports superseded missing pet flyers over time. Something fresh become an urban legend. Under the full moon, locals whispered tales of a gigantic, hideous rat that hunted unsuspecting humans who dared to venture outside alone. I felt a growing sense of guilt and shame with every new absence. Just plain old boredom and carelessness led me to release this evil. I was the one who put innocent people in danger by willfully disobeying the regulations. However, the missing persons cases came to a halt in the subsequent weeks. Something as enigmatic as the creature's appearance seemed to accompany its disappearance. Throughout this period, a profound and pervasive sense of shame embedded itself within me. It was my fault for that rat. I was the one responsible for the lost dogs and the terrified rumors that circulated across the neighborhood. Without seeing the impact of my own selfishness on others, I had lived a life of boredom and carelessness. Upon its realization, I was compelled to reconsider all aspects. I decided to give these rules the serious consideration they deserve, after realizing how carelessly I had disregarded their implications, both for myself and those around me. There were still 5.5 regulations to come, and I had no idea what the 5th one meant back then. After a long day of reflecting on my actions and ways to improve, I was sitting in my home office chair one evening when I noticed something peculiar sitting on top of my bookcase. It was an antique, family-run Chinese restaurant's signature porcelain Neko cat statue, the kind that would be seen waving from the counter. Aside from myself, no one else knew that I'd never had one. The paint had faded and tarnished, and it had chips all over its paws. It wasn't merely closing its eyes, they were tightly clamped shut. I froze and stared at it for a whole minute, practically daring it to move. A beep sounded on my phone. My heart rate increased as I listened to the reassuring sound of an email alert. 4th rule, never pet a cat while she's awake. That was all that was displayed on the screen. My gaze darted back to the statue, relief pouring over me as I saw that its eyes were still tightly shut. Meeting whatever gaze resided behind those lids sent shivers down my spine. I considered tossing the statue immediately, throwing it in the dumpster and washing my hands of whatever horrors awaited. But flashes of the rat monster in those icy dark eyes tormented me. These rules were no joke. Reluctantly, I noted Rule 4 in my expanding notebook of safeguards. I invited some buddies over the next day. A night of Beerio Kart, a mashup of cheap beer and traditional Mario Kart, was intended to be a respite from the chaos I had been coping with. Laughter resounded behind me as I rose to my feet, a little shaky from the drink, when my attention was suddenly drawn to something across the room. I felt sick to my stomach. The feline sculpture stared at me with its wide-eyed, abnormally bright eyes. The porcelain head cocked ever so slightly to meet my intense gaze. The laughter behind me sank into quiet when my friend saw that I had gone rigid. You good, dude?" Under the influence of alcohol? Zach's voice became a little more slurred and worried. A small smile slipped out of my mouth as I nodded rigidly. Both Zach and James were suddenly silent, watching me suspiciously. I strode gingerly across the room to the sculpture and nervously placed a shaking hand on top of its head, feeling completely foolish the whole time. My fingers brushed over its chilly surface, and mercifully the eyes gradually closed again, the head sliding softly back into its former posture. I spun around uncomfortably, drawing the puzzled glances of my companions. The sound of laughter erupted from Zach. "Whoa, dude, how tipsy are you?" As James sprayed beer from his mouth, he joined in. "Excuse me, but are you okay? We need to see you more often." My expression was one of shame and terror as I stifled a giggle, my gaze remaining apprehensively fixed on the statue, which mercifully stayed still. I made sure the statue had its eyes closed for several days after that. The experience with the statue actually sparked changes that I hadn't foreseen. In an effort to lessen the frequency of paranormal occurrences, I cut off coffee completely and began drinking tea instead. I also changed my evening routine. Now I read before bed and get a good night's sleep instead of binge-watching TV. In a last-ditch effort to forestall yet another garbage compactor disaster, I even started composting. Even while these restrictions were terrible, they had the unintended consequence of making me a better person. But old habits were difficult to break. I was in such a rush to get out of the house one morning that I forgot to check on the cat statue. I was late and anxious. The traffic was absolutely jammed, with vehicles moving at excruciatingly slow speeds. My temples throbbed with anxiety as I couldn't tear my eyes away from the clock, the red numbers belittling my tardiness. I felt a tickle on the nape of my neck, like if someone were breathing warm, damp air behind me. I swiveled my head to the side. Completely non-existent. Silence only served to heighten the impression. I blamed the radio for the muted whispering I thought I heard, so I turned it off. A heavy fog enveloped my reasonable thought as paranoia started to seep in. Had the feline been alert when I departed? Had I once again been irresponsible? However, I made an effort to relax my breathing just as the traffic started to move. Someone little darted out from under my vehicle. A horrible cry and a repulsive thump were heard. Vehicles swerved around me, making honking noises and screeching brakes. I limped to the front of my vehicle, my heart pounding with each step. Somewhere on the asphalt lay the lifeless body of a girl, perhaps no more than 10 years old. It shivered through me. I knelt down next to her and delicately turned her over as a wave of panic washed over me. Out of sheer terror, I drew back, staggering. It wasn't a human face. Her wide, glassy eyes were fixed on me as her features were horrifyingly contorted into a cat-like shape, and her gaping mouth displayed jagged teeth. The monster rose slowly, its limbs jerking in an odd way. It stared at me with a menacing grin that stretched across its teeth. Stress levels skyrocketed. Slamming the door shut and careening away, I dashed back to my car. Glancing in my rearview mirror, the cat girl stood immobile, her hand slowly waving as if to say goodbye. As the sight of her contorted smile seared itself into my mind, my breathing became labored and pounding. I was so lost and panting when I arrived at the office that I hurried to my cubicle. Similar to a horror movie playing on repeat, the events of that morning continued to rerun in my thoughts. I resisted looking directly at the shadowy figures that I thought I saw running between desks in the barely lit aisles as I made my way through the room. With every stride into my cubicle, my pulse pounded like it was being pulled deeper into a nightmare. Finally reaching my tiny workstation, I slumped into my chair and tucked my head into the corner, closed my eyes tightly. After a brief period of quiet, what seemed like shuffling feet began to rumble all around me. As they crept closer to my ears, a mix of horrifying whispers and meows sounded like cats. My heart raced, I started to perspire profusely, and tears streamed down my cheeks and onto the tabletop as a sign of the overwhelming panic I was feeling. I clutched the desk so tightly that my knuckles became white as I mumbled a request for it to end. I was startled into a full-on spin as the door to my cubicle flung open. It was none other than Patrick, who appeared more terrified than I was. "Excuse me, but I've been knocking for the past 5 minutes," he anxiously said. He seemed perplexed and little horrified. "Wow, I'm a hilarious prankster, how scary. My friend Patrick, I am not playing a practical joke on you." Wiping perspiration from my forehead, I snapped, "Yeah, absolutely." Patrick nervously circled his eyes and gestured at his own face. Those awesome contacts or anything. Uncomfortably, he retreated, nervously peering over his shoulder the whole while. I reached out to touch my face in a panic, hoping to feel something out of the ordinary, but I couldn't find anything. I staggered toward the restroom, my anxiety mounting. While I was on my way, I noticed heads peeking out from behind walls and the sound of whispers fading away from every direction I turned. While I hurried to the mirror, the lights in the restroom hummed gently. The pupils in my eyes were slit-shaped and abnormally long and narrow, like a cat's. I stumbled backward, trying to contain a scream that was about to escape. Holy cow! Countless unseen eyes were staring me down as I hurriedly exited the restroom and dashed toward the parking lot. Dark figures slipped through the trees, monitoring my every move as I drove home, their shadows twisting and stretching along the road. When I arrived at my flat, I unlocked the door with shaky hands. With its head cocked toward the entrance, eyes closed but belying its hostile expression, the cat statue awaited my arrival inside. Its customary posture of beckoning had been replaced with a stooped one as it hissed softly and appeared poised to leap. I glanced aside for one instant to put my keys away, and when I turned around, I saw its eyes wide open, 2 ebony holes peering directly into mine. I felt my heart racing in my ears. I gingerly approached the statue, trembling uncontrollably, and reached out to stroke its head. As soon as my digits made contact with its icy porcelain surface, a searing, excruciating pain surged through my eyes, like if sharp, twisted needles had pierced them. I felt as though unseen claws were grabbing and pulling at my eyeballs as I sank to the floor, writhing and yelling in agony. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the agony went away. I blinked quickly, my eyesight clearing, as I was afraid and gasping for air. With its eyes closed in a serene expression, the statue resumed its customary pose. Hurrying to the restroom, I caught a glimpse of my own eyes in the mirror, and the terror vanished as if it had never occurred. I let out a relieved, hysterical laugh. A few days off, a trembling SMS to my supervisor, and I was homesick. Another alarming message woke me up the following morning. I swiftly opened the email, even though my heart fell a little bit, because I was expecting more torture. 5th rule: when you leave the house, make sure to turn on exactly 1 light. I took a deep breath, carefully jotted down the rule, and then memorized it. With each new set of regulations came harsher penalties for disobeying them. I could no longer afford to make a mistake. In the days that followed, I diligently cleaned and organized my apartment while listening to paranormal podcasts that whispered in the background. In light of my recent encounters, I felt compelled to seek answers and make sense of the incomprehensible. I must admit that I had never been superstitious, frequently writing off tales of demons and ghosts as nothing more than attention-seeking drivel. Another email eventually came. Clause 6. Nod or say something nice to any animal you see. Reading this made me laugh out loud as I imagined how ridiculous it would be to meet every wandering animal, but my laughter quickly faded. Birds and squirrels were the first victims. While idly walking along, my train of thought would be interrupted by a squirrel on a neighboring fence. Suddenly, the little rodent would halt eating, its head would spin in an odd, slow motion toward me, and its eyes would be as black as marble. Even the birds would stop flying, motionless as if someone had hit the stop button, just so I could say hello. Only after that would things go back to normal, with birdsong and squirrels scurrying about as usual. The pets of the people also displayed strange behavior. On one occasion, while out for its regular stroll, a golden retriever halted and automatically turned its head, fixing its intense, seemingly bottomless gaze on me. I said, "Good afternoon," in a way that was both uncomfortable and excitedly whacking its tail once again. A lovely woman of my age who owned the dog laughed. "Oh, he has a thing for you," she said with a friendly smile. I had her number stored as April before I even knew it. Our discussion was so natural and easygoing. What had formerly been a terrifying set of regulations started to improve my life. I slept better, my flat was cleaner, and my social life was finally taking a turn for the better. I felt a sense of relief from boredom that I hadn't felt in years. However, just when I felt like things were starting to settle down, another email came, sending a chill down my spine. Principle 7. When the electricity goes out, it's best not to look at yourself in the mirror. Worry welled up in my gut. A shudder went down my spine, and bile rose in my throat as I glanced at the television. I sensed a profound malaise. I hastily gathered my belongings, anxious to get home and evaluate the issue. My heart sunk the moment I opened my door, though. The electricity went off. I felt the weight of darkness pressing down on my eyes, and the darkness itself appeared denser than normal. I muttered an expletive. At what point did the electricity go out? Rule number 5, which states that one must always leave one light on, had been disregarded by me. I revealed mayhem by activating the flashlight on my mobile device. Crumbs all over the counters, dishes in the sink, and furniture moved about in an odd way. As it slammed against the wall, the fortunate Nico-Cat statue scowled. I hastily made my way to my closet to get a portable light that ran on batteries. Time and again, I had to tell myself not to look at myself in the mirror. With my gaze fixed squarely ahead, I cautiously made my way past the restroom. Then I heard it, and I reached for the light. Something familiar sounded like a creepy whisper. The voice called out to Jamie, "Jamie, come over here." A voice that betrayed my malevolent intentions belonged to my childhood, a voice that sounded like mine but had been perverted. As perspiration trickled down the back of my neck, my heart was pounding. "There is a lot we can discuss, Jamie." As if it were a window, it persisted in tapping against the bathroom mirror. I walked out of the restroom after closing my eyes and taking a few nervous breaths. I set the light on the kitchen counter, and its faint light just made it into the shadows. In my desperation for the familiar, I fumbled for my phone, but I stopped in my tracks as a different, darker, chillier voice cut me off. "Oh, what a letdown you are." A low, poisonous voice escaped. As my paralyzed fingers let go of the phone, it clattered to the floor, and the screen cracked violently against the tiles, causing my heart to stop. The kitchen walls were cast in lengthy, twisted shadows by the weak light of the battery-operated light. Gradually, I felt an irresistible pull toward the circular mirror in the living room. Slowly, the mirror visage started to transform as my reflection peered back with pale, sunken eyes, afraid. An abnormally wide and grotesque grin that appeared to split the cheeks unnaturally spread out from its curled upward lips. The skin drooped and distorted like melted wax, and the flesh around its left eye slumped downward, deforming into an oval that was malformed. "What a monster you've turned into," it said with all its cruelness. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stood frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. The twisted and deformed features of my mirror kept changing, and the mocking smile never went away. My trembling hand fumbled its way clumsily up to my face as I instinctively checked to see if everything was still in its proper place. "Your voice is low and resonant, and you sound pitiful." "Jamie, you have been given every opportunity imaginable, and yet here you are, a hamster in his little wheel, working to survive and working to survive." The mirror let out a deep, mocking laugh as its tongue drooped irregularly, like a serpent's. The poison seeped out of every contorted word. Even though my voice quivered and stuttered like a scared child's, I mustered the courage to speak out. "My life has transformed. I am now healthier and more alert than before." In an instant, my reflection made fun of me, and I lowered my voice to impatient, spiteful, childish levels. "Jamie, I'm stuttering again. I just can't seem to get a word out. Yes, you have transformed completely as a result of your cherished regulations." The final statement resounded like a rumbling thunder, resonating deep within me. Stupid. Aren't you capable of independent thought? In a word, no. Look at you stuttering again, terrified of your mirror, after you frittered away your grandparents' estate on nothing. Identify yourself. With my legs trembling, I backed away slowly, scarcely whispering. Its limbs stretched thin and spider-like as my warped reflection arose and horribly elongated. Within the mirror's limits, it stood tall and menacing. "I'm you, Jamie," it muttered, its painfully slow speech betraying its cruel pleasure. "Here you are, ensnared by your own transgressions and remorse, and I'm sick and weary of it." Its sudden reversal and forceful collision with the glass was unexpected. The whole wall trembled as the mirror shattered, sending shards flying in all directions. As it retreated, I collapsed to the floor and hurriedly ducked into a corner, powerless to stop it. It was as if it were a predator, always prepared for another attack. The reflection slammed into the mirror again, this time with its warped face, a masked expression of joy and fury. We were almost shattered as the wall shook and tiny fissures spread out like spider webs. Panting with an innate want to eat, it withdrew. "Apologies." I stutter-talked frantically, hardly knowing my own voice. "I have been making an effort, and I am improving. Is it better?" As it leaned in closer, it menacingly scowled. Whispering something personal, its voice lowered once more. "These rules are essential, Jamie. They're the glue that keeps your meaningless existence together. Confess it." As I drew inward, my legs were shielded by my arms as my back pressed against the kitchen counter in a painful curvature. I found myself gasping for air, my short breaths resonating in the stifling blackness. "Recognize it!" the mirror yelled. With my teeth clenching and my arms getting unbearably long, I retreated for another assault. I was paralyzed with dread and couldn't move, despite my strong want to yell and hurl something at it. Its hideous face twisted in anticipation as it charged forward once more, and all I could do was stare helplessly. Just as I was about to lose my vision in the mirror, the lights flickered back on, temporarily blinding me. As my breath resounded in my ears, the words, my own warped voice, repeated in the mirror like a sinister mantra, penetrating my mind with every syllable. Each and every accusation, harsh reality and statement it made was absolutely accurate. Those aspects of my identity that I had repressed for so long were finally emerging from hiding. I felt like a puppet with tangled ropes as I sunk farther into darkness and misery for the next hour. Eventually, I forced myself to get up. I started cleaning the flat in an effort to go back to normal, but something seemed off. This place had another presence. The muted squeaks of doors softly opening and shutting added to its ambience. I felt a shiver run down my back as I heard hushed footsteps make their way from the living room into the kitchen. Still, each time I hurried to see, I found nothing but nothingness. Worriedly following the rules while waiting for the next terrifying sight became a haze as the days passed. One night, I was startled out of my reverie by a notification, and my heart raced until I realized it was only a text message from April. Reading her invitation to dinner made me feel relieved and made me grin. I accepted and got dressed fast because I was eager to get out of my stifling home environment. The cat statue caught my eye as I was about to leave. Its wide-eyed, accusatory and impatient eyes betrayed no emotion. "How dependent on others are you?" As I caressed its icy porcelain head, an uneasy laugh escaped me. "I will return immediately." A change of pace was in order for dinner with April. I felt an unusual bond with her as we spoke. Her narrative was interesting, and her laughter was real. While on temporary assignment to train in a distant shop, she was celebrating her recent promotion to manager at a grocery firm. The evening flew by, and now we're both looking forward to our next get-together. She was driving away, and I almost skipped to my car. For a brief moment, the burden of recent tragedies was relieved. My phone chimed while I was at home, snug in bed with Carl Sagan's Cosmos faintly illuminated on my Kindle. My smile quickly disappeared as I saw the typical email notice instead of the message I was expecting from April. As I cautiously opened it, my hands shaking as I prepared my notebook, a wave of fear washed over me. Article 8. The next time you hear a strange animal noise, don't glance out the window. The tranquility outside was broken abruptly by an inhuman cry that sounded like a cross between a mountain lion's growl and a deer's scream. From a distance, it became increasingly louder and more agitated as it got closer. Out of nowhere, a substantial object pounded on the exterior wall, desperately attempting to crack the window pane. My pulse was thumping frantically as the blinds shook. Reliving my fear as a child, I dove under my cover. The crying changed, finding it difficult to articulate. I would like to enter. Every word was choked with desperation. The voice started to alter, getting softer and unsettlingly familiar. I gasped for air as my breath became shallow and quick. "Hello, Jamie." Once a lovely purr, it now sounded uncannily like April's voice. "We're having a blast tonight. Excuse me, sweetheart. Here it's below freezing." When it got to the word freezing, its voice morphed into a low, predatory growl. Clinging tenaciously to my covers, I remained motionless. "Oh, stay out there and freeze," I whispered, lacking any real courage. It had persisted ceaselessly, going through my mom, my sister, and some close acquaintances, with each impersonation getting more realistic and devastating until they were indistinguishable from the genuine thing. Reality, however, was more compelling. No one, least of all my 60-year-old mother, could have been sitting on the outside windowsill from where I was on the 4th level. Until, thankfully, daylight started to peek over the blinds, I squinted my eyes shut and endured the nightmare chorus. A figure remained for an instant, obstructing the dawn, before gradually dissipating into thin air. I stood up to begin the day, releasing a breath that was trembling. No new regulations were sent for months. A peculiar new cadence became the norm. In a strange twist of fate, these scary regulations really helped me grow and develop. On one occasion, while the power was out, I purposefully disregarded Rule 7 by staring into a mirror, facing my concerns head-on, and ultimately improving myself. I went out and purchased noise-cancelling earplugs in the hopes of blocking out the nighttime noises outside my window. Despite the strange noises and shadows that occasionally floated past my flat, even Rule 5 felt manageable, even though its repercussions were unclear. Possibly all I had done was find a peaceful roommate. Our texts eventually went into a tailspin when April departed for her training. Whatever the case may be, maybe she found someone else or simply lost interest. I was able to accept it and move on with my life, feeling stronger than before. An envelope was stuck into my door one evening as I was walking home from work. Anxieties was building in my stomach as I waited to open it. Rule 8.5 was written on a single note inside. No matter what you do, never. Like an itchy itch, the half-rule crept into my head and began to eat away at my sanity. I was overshadowed with paranoia. It was always there, following me around and rattling my cage with doubts. Months later, I still worriedly peered over my shoulder, sure that I could hear a quiet voice calling my name even though no one was around. The air was always so empty and the quiet was so thick that it felt like an alien invasion. It was as if the park's inhabitants were ignoring me as I strolled through, since their shadows were gently altered or moving at different speeds than their owners. Suddenly, I would halt, fixating on my own shadow, which I insisted moved or twitched, as if to dare me to deny its existence. Once again, self-doubt set in. Possibly Patrick and the rest of my co-workers had been plotting some nasty, complex prank involving dousing me the whole time. Perhaps I had finally snapped under the pressure. But no matter how much I tried to reason, my thoughts kept returning to that incomplete rule, and I eventually went crazy from conjecture. At some point, even this heightened sense of anxiety became boring, becoming another ordinary aspect of existence. The monotony of the rule-based routines returned, and the vibrancy of my everyday life faded away. Another little notification popped up on my computer while I typed this out at my desk. I felt my pulse race as I opened the email. Those are the only 2 words. "Still bored?" A broad smile swept over my countenance.